All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Callanan. I'm the principal here at Woburn Memorial High School. I want to thank you for all of you being here in attendance, both students, staff, parents, and members of the community. To name a few people to give specific thanks to is Rick Jolly, who organized this through the mayor's office. Mayor Galvin. I want to thank the aldermen for being in attendance, Lindsay Higgins, Eddie Tedesco, and Rich Haggerty, the chair of the City Council, as well as our school committee members, Chris Kissel and Pat Chisholm, Chief Ferrulo, my administrative team, as well as all of the work that the custodial staff and our AV club put into making this evening happen tonight. So this is, to me, a very important topic, and I feel very honored to have a very, very well-known speaker this evening. And I'm not going to go into Dr. Potee's credentials. That's going to be covered by Mr. Jolly. But I do want to say that we've been doing a series of parent universities, but they're for parents as well as community members and students. And it's topics that we as a staff feel that are very important that we see come up time and time again with young people, different things that they have to face as they go through high school. And the next one that will be coming is going to be on social host liability in May, and Ms. Bakari, our adjustment counselor, will be hosting that. And I think that I did forget to say thank you for Dr. Crowley, our assistant superintendent, for being here as well. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Mr. Rick Jolly, who will do a proper introduction of our guest this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. As Principal Callanan said, my name is Rick Jolly. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the Substance Abuse Program Coordinator here for the City of Woburn. And I've had the pleasure to see Dr. Potee, her presentation twice? Two or three times so far. And it's very, very good, very informative, and it's very popular. It took us about 5 months to get her to come out here. You know, the schedule's pretty full. Dr. Ruth Potee is a board-certified family physician and addiction medicine physician at Valley Medical Group in Greenfield, Mass. She's a native of Western Massachusetts and attended public schools in the North Quabbin region. Dr. Potee attended Wellesley College, Yale University School of Medicine, and did a residency at Boston University, where she remained as an assistant professor for family medicine for 8 years. In addition to practicing family medicine, Dr. Potee is the medical director of the Franklin County House of Correction, the Franklin Recovery and Treatment Center, and the Pioneer Valley Regional School District. She is also the chair of the Healthcare Solutions of the Opioid Task Force of Franklin County. Dr. Potee was named Franklin County Doctor of the Year by the Massachusetts Medical Society and is the chair of the Department of Medicine at Bay State Franklin Medical Center. And we brought Dr. Potee here specifically to discuss this topic, and after the the passing of question 4, legalization of recreational marijuana, we thought it was very important to address this issue. So I'd like to thank Dr. Potee for being here tonight. Dr. Potee?
Thanks to Rick and the principal, and it's so nice to have so many people in the room and have people who are officials in the school committee. I love that, and the fact that I have staff in the room. And who are my students? I see a couple students. Give me your hands. Awesome. I love that there's students here. Oh, look at that. I got a whole classroom over there. Are you guys getting like extra credit? You get homework passes? You do, don't you? Awesome. If I stand here, is the sound bad? No? Okay. I'll move around a little bit. So, are my slides up here? So anybody who wants these slides, I'm going to actually pour Rick on the hook for this one. Anybody who wants these slides can have them. Rick has them, and you can maybe give him your email, maybe a sign-up sheet out there, and anybody who wants them can take the slides. I'd be delighted if anybody else gave this talk anywhere you want to give this talk. You don't need to credit me. Just go spread the word. So we're going to talk about brain development, teenage brain development, and specifically we're going to spend time talking about the reward circuit of the brain, which is the most ancient elemental part of the brain. It is the part of the brain that allows you to survive. It tells you to find food and water and to find a mate. Because although nobody thinks this way, Our job on this planet is to survive long enough to spread your genetic material forward. That is really why you are here. In over 200,000 years that we have been in this human form, this is what the point of us is. Now, most of us get up and we go to work and we go to school and we play sports and we walk the dog. But really, at a basic level, this is what the intention of our brains is. So it's the eat, drink, have sex. And the problem is, it is this part of the brain that is affected by drugs. And if we could pick up addiction and move it to any other part of the brain, you could put it in the visual cortex or the auditory system of the brain, and you just lost your peripheral vision, addiction would be a piece of cake to fix. It really would. And instead, it attaches itself and disrupts the system in your brain that has to do with surviving. Every day, deciding, I want to live today. That's where addiction goes. So it's kind of a disaster, and it's one of the hardest diseases to treat. Today, I had to tell a young woman that she had pancreatic cancer, which is a really bad diagnosis. But the truth is, her alcoholism is going to kill her before her pancreatic cancer will. And it was a hard discussion to have with her, but I felt quite confident that my assessment there was correct. Her disease of alcoholism is really severe. So we're going to spend no time talking about serotonin, which is the red stuff that governs mood and cognition and sleep. For those of us with anxiety and depression, serotonin's impacted. We're going to spend most of our time talking about dopamine, which is this neurotransmitter in the brain that gives you this enormous sense of pleasure and euphoria and holy smokes, that was awesome, I need to do that all over again. It has with it associated fine motor skills. So people who struggle with a nicotine addiction will say, look, I have a patch on, I'm chewing the gum. I don't really miss the nicotine, I miss the process. I miss opening the package, tapping out the cigarettes, lighting the cigarettes. I miss something in my fingers, in my mouth. So if there's a fine motor component to all of addiction, and getting at that is something we're often missing in treatment. There's two behaviors associated with dopamine. One is compulsivity, and the other one is called perseveration. And your ancestors were absolutely marvelous at perseveration and compulsive thinking. They needed to be. Because in order to survive in Woburn or anywhere in New England 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you need to be focused all the time on how am I going to find food, water, how am I going to protect my young? Because life used to be really hard. For as much complaining as all of us do, we are an unbelievably gifted society. You guys could go feed the entire world over just at Market Basket down the street, right? Nobody here is out hunting and gathering. Nobody has a shortage of clean water. We're not in Flint, Michigan, right? Things are really easy for us. But not so long ago, things were really hard for your ancestors, and they were compulsive and they perseverated, and that's why everybody in this room exists. Because those behaviors, when it comes to addiction, when it comes to survival, are awesome behaviors. Those behaviors, when it comes to addiction, are really frustrating behaviors. Yet those two behaviors are two of the strongest associated behaviors with addiction. I can't stop thinking about the drug, I cannot stop my cravings, and I cannot stop my use. So some of us at a baseline have really high dopamine levels, and this is not something that you can have tested in your serum. Don't call your doctor tomorrow and ask for a serum dopamine test. The argument I make is that most of us sit at an average of about 100. Some of us are happy-go-lucky golden retrievers. We feel awesome most days. We always see the positive side of everything, and our dopamine levels may be at 106 most days. Some of us, and I have people like this in my family, have low dopamine. It's just their baseline sitting at 85. They're sort of the Eeyores of the planet. We all have them. We love them, and even though sometimes it's hard. These are people who come to my office a lot. These are people who are at the doctor's office a lot. So when you're sitting at a baseline of 100 units of dopamine every day, and you find this perfect food, and back in the old days, your ancestors, if they were able to, find themselves a wild boar or a great piece of fish, they got a spike in dopamine because this is a piece of meat that's going to allow them and their families to survive for another week. They would get a dopamine spike because you want them to return to that behavior again. For me, a nice flourless chocolate cake, a perfect, August peach or June strawberry, you get a spike in dopamine. So you find this perfect food, you spike to 150, and then you return to normal. You have sex, it's consensual sex, you have an orgasm, your dopamine spikes to 200, and then it goes back to normal. You use a drug like cocaine, and your dopamine will spike to 350. You use a strong opiate like prescription opiate or heroin or these days fentanyl, your dopamine will spike between 500 and 900. And when you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine, your dopamine will go between 12 and 1300. So those are really, really unbelievably high levels. And what's extraordinary is that more people aren't actively doing these behaviors, and there's a reason, and there's a very good reason why most of us don't engage in addictive behaviors, and that is because it disrupts the brain messaging system so profoundly. So let's take a breath and let's remind ourselves how dopamine works exactly. There's three things that govern the amount of dopamine in your brain: how much dopamine you produce, how many dopamine receptors are sitting on the other side of the synaptic cleft getting information, and how many of these little vacuums are sucking dopamine out of the cleft. Those are the three things that get impacted when it comes to dopamine in the brain. And the way cocaine works is it turns off the vacuum. So the vacuums are turned off, so there's nothing sucking the dopamine out. That's how you got yourself to a 350. The way that heroin or any of the opiates works is slightly more complicated because it goes through a negative feedback loop and it hooks to a mu receptor, but at the end of the day, all of the opiates produce more dopamine. That's how it pushes it out. So every addictive behavior, every addictive substance, at the end of the day, lands itself at dopamine. Some of the pathways get really complicated, but it all impacts one of those three things in the equation. So this is the problem, is that over the 200,000 years that we've existed in this form, our brains have gotten adjusted to having a dopamine of 150 or 200. That's considered normal for survival. But when the brain starts to see dopamine levels of 300, 500, 900, 1300, your brain's response to that is to say, holy smokes, something is wrong. My brain is producing too much. I need to downregulate. I need to turn this off. I am going to stop making dopamine. I'm going to erase 80% of my dopamine receptors, and I'm going to turn on every vacuum in sight. And all of a sudden, this chemical in the brain that allows you to feel joy and pleasure and allows you to survive is no longer sitting at 100 or 85 every day. You wake up every morning and your new dopamine set is about 40 or 45. That's your new brain. And it is hard to get out of bed, have a shower, feed your dog, be nice to your kids, go to work, interact with a colleague when you're feeling like that. You can barely function when your dopamine levels are that low. But that's your new set every day for months or years while you're trying to get yourself out of this addiction. So it leads to this concept of a broken brain. And the brain is not bleeding, the brain doesn't have bones in it, but you have this tremendous disruption in the neurotransmitter system of the most critical component of your brain. Now I want to talk about what happened at the local hospital. Will you guys remind me, if you're really sick, you have a broken something, what hospital do you go to? You go to Winchester Hospital, okay. I guarantee you this happened at Winchester, and I'm not going after Winchester Hospital. This happened at every hospital in this country this week. So I'm going to throw Winchester under the bus because I throw everybody under the bus. So this is Winchester's ER, and that 68-year-old man is having crushing substernal chest pain, and his wife calls 911. And likely police arrive first, but maybe 911's right alongside them. And they walk in the door and they see an ashen man clutching his chest. And they know what to do. They give this guy a sublingual nitroglycerin, he gets a beta blocker, he gets an aspirin, they put in a big IV line in him, maybe they give him some morphine if they're a high-end ambulance. They run an EKG on him in his living room, and that EKG is so alarming that the Winchester ER, who has it transmitted to them, says, you know what, don't bother bringing him. Send him straight to the Mass General. This guy needs serious work instantly, and we're not going to be able to do it. So he gets trucked down 93 to the Mass General, and he gets quadruple bypass surgery. He's brought to the cardiac care unit for 4 days because he's going to need it. He's intubated. He's on the floor for another week. He's a social work consult because he's going to be depressed. He gets a primary care follow-up, a cardiology follow-up, and cardiac rehab. That young woman is his next door neighbor. She's 24 years old and she has an opiate use disorder, and her mom knows this about her. So when her mom finds the bathroom door locked and her daughter not responding on the other side, her mom freaks out a little bit and with that high adrenaline kicks that door down, finds her daughter not breathing, pretty darn blue, lying on the ground of the bathroom. Her mom has Narcan at home because she knows her daughter struggles. She calls 911 first. She administers Narcan. Her daughter doesn't come to, but then Woburn police have arrived, and possibly fire and EMS, and every one of them is probably likely carrying Narcan. They get 3 more doses in her before she wakes up. She's brought to the Winchester Hospital ER, and what is given to her? Well, she's had Narcan already, and she's awake and fighting mad. What was that? So I got a lineup of women in front of me who seem to know what they're talking about. She's handed a sheet of paper with a bunch of telephone numbers and saying, hey, love, good luck to you. Here's some numbers. Call basically every 10 minutes for the next 36 hours and see if you can find yourself a spot in detox. And then she's kicked to the curb. So I want to tell you a little bit more about my 68-year-old patient. So he's 68, and both of his parents had massive heart attacks at the age of 59. His dad actually died of a heart attack at the age of 59. He's a pack-a-day smoker. He kicks back a 12-pack of beer every day. He goes to McDonald's 3 times a week. He has a big pot belly. Definitely doesn't exercise. Definitely not addicted to exercise. Doesn't see me, his primary care doctor, because I saw him one time 3 years ago, and I told him he had uncontrolled hypertension. He never picked up his blood pressure medicine. That gentleman created his disease. 100%, 150%. That 68-year-old man lived a life that allowed him to have a massive heart attack. That's a fact. Now, nobody wagged his finger at him when he was standing in his living room clutching his chest, saying, you know what, I'm not going to provide care to you because you clearly have an addiction. Because he does. He's addicted to nicotine. He might have an alcohol use disorder. He's addicted to fat and salt and sugar, and definitely not addicted to exercise. Nobody did that, because the truth is, who's perfect in this room, right? Who in this room is a vegan who runs like 40 miles a week? Anybody's doing that? Going to yoga every single day? Everybody in this room has a perfect life? No, right? We all live the lives that we lead, and we try to be as healthy as we can, and I ate a can of Pringles and a Diet Coke on my drive here, because that's what I do on Thursday nights, because I am starving, I'm not going to have time, and I'm going to be home at midnight, and I need to stay awake. So that's my disgusting gas station dinner. And I'm not perfect, and otherwise I try to be healthy. So my point is that with this man, we provided him the best medical care that could be provided for him in our fine country. And how much did this cost for this guy? Anybody know? 20 grand. I love that. That's like, I don't know, I love your optimism. Times by 15. So that was $250,000, maybe $300,000. We send him to the Mass General. That's man's greatest hospital. They have a surcharge for that name. So yeah, a lot of money. $250,000 we spent on a guy who, if he wanted to have taken care of himself, wouldn't have had a heart attack. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that we should have wagged our finger at him and said, look, dude, you created this problem. Let's not provide you care. What I'm arguing is the disease of addiction, whether it's to alcohol or to opiates or to nicotine, it is a disruption in the brain the way that he has a disruption in his endothelial cells, in his pancreas, in his cardiovascular system. And this disruption needs to be managed by the American healthcare system. And if you're going to treat people with addiction the way that we treat them, then you should treat everybody that way. You should look at all the people around you who take terrible care of themselves and are overweight and don't exercise and are smoking. Deny them care. Spread it equally, right? Of course we're not going to do that. Our job is to take people when they're sick and to provide them the best care, unless they're addicted to something, and then we provide them the worst possible care imaginable. And the reason I do this work is I'm so outraged by the fact that my colleagues, and in the past possibly me, did not recognize this disease well enough and provide the care needed at the time it was needed. We do not train nurses, we do not train doctors or PAs or NPs in anything about addiction during their training years. Yet 10 to 15% of us struggle with an addiction. It's incredibly frustrating. So the next time you go to your primary care doctor, ask them the question, what are you doing to help people with addiction? Are you recognizing alcohol use disorder, and are you getting people the treatment they need? Because we need people to step up to the plate and do their jobs. So I'm just going to go back to dopamine again, because this is actually a picture to actually tell you I didn't make up my whole little dopamine story. So this is a PET scan that looks at the brain, and that middle column is a healthy brain with lots of orange dopamine racing through it, which is great. And the brains that are far over to the right column are brains that don't have nice orange in them, because those are brains of people struggling with addiction. The top one's cocaine, the next one down is methamphetamine, the third one down is alcohol, and the final one is heroin. The brain with methamphetamine, that is a particularly dangerous and destructive drug to the human brain. I've only taken care of a handful of patients with methamphetamine use, and I tell you, they're the hardest patients I've ever cared for because the disruption is so enormous. What I like to point out is the brain with alcohol use disorder. There's still some orange floating there from maybe the back, you can't really see it, but dopamine is still racing around at people with alcohol use disorder, and the wheels come off that bus fairly late in the game. And we're going to come back to alcohol at length actually, but people are fairly functional alcoholics for a long time. They may be passed down on their couch and not being great parents or aunts and uncles at 7 o'clock every night. They may be not performing as well as at work, but before your wife walks out on you, before you lose your job, before you got your third OUI, people skate by with alcohol use disorder for a long time. And that doesn't mean it's not a serious problem. It is a serious problem, and I think as a society, its impact on us as families, on jails, on families is enormous, and I'm never going to understate that. So there are three things that will be a precursor to developing an addiction. And they are genetics, early exposure, and a history of trauma. Now, having poor mental health does not mean you're going to develop an addiction. It's just that poor mental health is often a subcomponent of those other things. So when you ask somebody, why was it that you started using marijuana at the age of 13? And you're talking to them as an adult, they will often say, I had terrible anxiety, or I was really stressed out, and the marijuana made me feel better. So they were self-medicating for a mental health disorder. So because you have depression or anxiety at an early age does not mean you will develop an addiction. But if it's a subcomponent of early exposure, a childhood trauma, or genetics, then you're at higher risk. So let's talk about the genetics of addiction. If you have a parent or a grandparent who struggles with an addiction, you have about a 50% chance of developing an addiction yourself. So the people in the room who need to hear that most clearly are actually the kids in the room. And the parents in the room need to find it within your ability to talk to your kids about your genetic risk of addiction, because most of us don't do that. I have kids come to my office and they're like 13 and they say, my great-great-aunt had colon cancer. And I never do this, but in the back of my head, I'm like eye rolling thinking, who cares, right? Like, that is not going to impact your life. But your family history of either major mental health disorder or addiction will impact your health and life. So when I sat down with my 3 teenagers, I said, look, loves, we have a big genetic risk of addiction in our family. You don't get to control your genetics. You get what you get, and that's just the way it is. But you get to control the next factor entirely. And when you control the next factor well, you can almost entirely erase the genetic risk. So that is when you expose your brain, the developing brain, to an addictive substance. So everybody who develops an addiction, 99% of the time, has used an addictive substance before the age of 24, before the brain is done developing. If you do not have a substance that's addictive before the age of 24, I'm not including sugar, I'm not going to put sugar, which is very addictive, in that category, but if you are able to delay your use of your first addictive substance till your brain is fully developed or nearly developed, you get to almost completely erase your genetics, which is fabulous. There's very few diseases you get to do that for. And when you talk to somebody who struggles with an addiction, one of the things I always ask is, how old were you when you first started? Was it alcohol, marijuana, or tobacco? Because those are the common ones. And were you 12, 13, or 14? Because those are the most common ages. Every now and then I'll get somebody who said, no, really, I was 19 years old. And I'm always surprised by that, because that's atypical. And when I've given this talk to the jails before, and I have a whole bunch of guys in a room, 120 guys in a room, or women, and I'll say, who in this room was 12 when they first started using? And every hand is up at 12. And then I start to count backward, 11, 10, 9. I have hands in the air at the age of 6 years old, a first grader. But that's at a jail population, some of our sickest individuals in our society, and that is a brain that was exposed. Really, quite honestly, parents were giving them those substances, because a first grader's not lighting a match or opening a beer bottle, right? They're exposed in a family situation. So all addiction is considered a developmental pediatric disease, and your kids get to control the time that they decide they're going to first use. So if you are a 15-year-old and you start drinking alcohol, and alcohol is defined as 2 drinks a week, just 2 drinks a week, not that much, 15 years old, 40% of those 15-year-olds will go on to become alcoholics. If you wait until the age of 21, 7%, which is well less than national averages. So again, this is about the brain under development, and we're going to dive in on how the brain develops and why it is that substances really have such an impact. This is a graph that shows that the genetics almost gets erased. So one of the amazing things about our teenagers is they are making the best choices around substance abuse that we've seen in 40 years. So every now and then I feel like our kids get sort of pointed at and saying, you guys are a disaster, or you're addicted to your screens, and you're addicted to all these substances. The truth, I can't say about screens. I think a lot of our kids are really addicted to their screens. But when it comes to substance use, whether it's alcohol or nicotine, and I'm going to come to marijuana in a minute, our kids are making fabulous choices, right? 70%, 70+% of our kids are doing none of this stuff in high school. The rate of cigarette use has never been lower. The sense of harm around cigarette use is huge. If you ask the average 15-year-old, do you smoke? They're like, of course I don't smoke. It's disgusting. Most teenagers are disgusted by cigarettes. They know the harm of it. They're really expensive. It smells gross. Who would ever smoke? That's their attitude. And I went to high school in the 80s. We smoked in school. The teacher's lounge was the smoking lounge, right? And, I mean, anybody else remember this? I'm not that much older than anybody else in the room. The problem with marijuana, though, is the perceived risk or harm of marijuana is incredibly low. So let's spend a minute on that. What do people under the age of 25 say about marijuana? And I would love my teenagers in the room to answer too. Nobody's going to get in trouble. What do we know about marijuana? It's not addictive. They'll say it's not addictive. Yep, what else? It's not a gateway drug. It's not going to lead me down another bad path, okay? Good. Two common ones. What else? It's legal, and now it is legal, so that one's true so far. It's legal. What else? It's natural. It's organic. It grows in your yard. The pharmaceutical industry is not making it out of a chemistry lab. What else? It's better than alcohol. They say that one all the time. They do a direct comparison to the legal drug of alcohol. Absolutely. Man, you guys are good because I think you got them almost all. Oh, it's medicine. It fixes my problems. It helps me sleep. It helps me with my anxiety. It cures cancer and stops seizures. So I think you guys have hit most of the common responses that the average 24 and under will say about marijuana. So we're going to spend time now on marijuana, and in fact, you guys are going to kill me on marijuana, but this is really critical that people help understand this. Okay, so we used to think that the brain was done developing by age 12, and that's absolutely crazy because we are now very clear that for the next 12 years after age 12, in this building, incredibly critical things are happening. So one of the incredibly critical things that is happening is called synaptic refinement. Your brains have tens of billions of synapses. Actually, the old brains don't have those anymore, but my young brains in this room have tens of billions of connections, and nobody needs that many. And in fact, it is unhealthy to have that many connections in the brain. You need to prune them back. And the adolescent phase of brain development is about clipping back these unnecessary parts of the brain. There are times during adolescence you're losing 30,000 synapses a second. So our kids are doing amazing things all day long, and one of the most important things is they're cleaning up this tangled mess of their brain. The second thing that happens is called myelination, or ensheathing these efficient pathways, insulating fast pathways that will keep you on track for the rest of your life. But you could imagine how you could insulate or make pathways that aren't so healthy for the rest of your life. So these two critical things are happening. And I want to be clear, this is normal. Our kids' brains, and again, I have teenagers in the room, and I'm never going to throw my teenagers under a bus, but I parent 3 teenagers, and it can be really hard to parent these developing brains because they can be incredibly frustrating. This brain that they have is the brain they're supposed to be having right now. They need to be pushing the envelope. They need to be pushing you as a parent. They need to be figuring out, what the walls and the boundaries are, which means they're incredibly sensation-seeking. They tend to have a very strong preference for physical activity. Emotions are felt unbelievably intensely, right? For those of us who are parenting teenage girls right now, like they're crying, and then 10 seconds later they love you and they're smiling, and 15 seconds later they're screaming at you. I mean, this, right? Anybody else have that in their house? I'm not the only one, right? Oh, we got a hand back there. Okay. There's a less consideration for negative consequences. There's less than optimal planning. There's more risky, impulsive behavior. There's this attitude of act first, think later. This is what a teenage brain is supposed to look like, because this is the brain that's trying to sort out what it's getting rid of and what it's holding on to. This is all good, even though it's all hard sometimes. There's never a time in your life where you will be more influenced by your peers, ever. When you're 7 years old, you're not influenced by your peers like you are when you're a teenager. When you're 27 and your friends tell you to go do something stupid, you're like, dude, that's so stupid. I'm not going to do that. But when you're 15, you're like, I'm in. That sounds like a great idea, right? And that's because this, evolutionarily speaking, this is a group that's trying to find its herd. They're trying to find their people. They got kicked out of the cave. They're trying to figure out where they're going. So friends and peers really matter. That's the way it's supposed to be. So there's a third thing that happens in the developing brain, okay? It lays down receptors. And the first receptor it lays down in the outer cortex of the brain is the dopamine receptor. That is what gets laid down during the ages of 12 to 24. And I just described to you how addictive substances impact dopamine. And if during this critical time where I'm laying down my dopamine receptors, I'm exposed to something that disrupts my dopamine, that's why all addiction starts while the brain is developing. The second thing that gets laid down is a receptor called anandamide. And anandamide is this naturally occurring neuroendocannabinoid that determines what gets pruned and what gets kept. And guess what? THC, which is the psychoactive component of marijuana, is the mirror image of anandamide. And so when THC enters the brain, it fills this receptor that this really important naturally occurring endocannabinoid was supposed to fill, and it knocks it out of the way. And THC is like a sledgehammer to the brain as opposed to a really awesome, skillful surgical scalpel that makes really bad decisions about what gets kept and what gets thrown away. So for the average teenager out there who thinks marijuana is all good, no trouble, I'm going to say this very strong statement. I don't really care what you do as an adult over the age of 25 or 26 with marijuana. I don't think it's any worse than alcohol. I don't want you driving. I don't want you changing the lug nuts on my car. I don't want you operating on my knee. In a developed brain, I do not think it is more harmful than alcohol. But while the brain is developing, the argument I'm going to make to you is that marijuana is a very disruptive drug to the developing brain. So these are little white dots are all the places where THC attaches to the brain. These are the final frontier, the final last 12 years of development. That's where it goes. I'm going to skip a couple slides. And again, anybody who wants my slides is going to take my slides. So studies that look at adolescents who start using, and definition of heavy use of marijuana is just daily use. I have kids in my practice who use marijuana 6 times a day. Daily use, once a day, is considered heavy use. So this isn't once a month, but most kids who are using marijuana are using it every day. There's an impact on attention, verbal learning, memory, processing speed, even when the kids are not high. This is a complicated slide, and I may not have... I don't know what you guys are seeing. Oops, that was bad. So you're going to have to just trust me on this because for some reason the second component of the slide did not load up, but I'm going to talk you through it because it's complicated, but it's worth understanding. So this is a slide that compares young adults who used 0 marijuana between the ages of 15 and 21. That is the light blue bar graph at the high part of this. And it compares them to young adults who used marijuana 400 times or more between the ages of 15 and 21. Now, again, the math on 400 times of marijuana use, that's not that much, right? That's daily use for a year and change. Or it's using it 5 times a day for a very short amount of time, right, if you do the math. So when you look at college graduation rates by age 25, those people who used marijuana 0 times graduated from college at about 34% of the time. For the kids who used it 400 times or more, their college graduation rates were 17%. The graph that isn't popping up, and I apologize for that, is the one right below it. And what it showed is that being unemployed by the age of 25, 18% of people who used marijuana 0 times were unemployed by the age of 25. 45% of kids using marijuana 400 times or more were unemployed by the age of 25. That, for me, is a picture of failure to launch, right? Like, I think all of us who are raising our kids want our kids to be healthy human beings who contribute to society, and I'm only speaking for myself here. I want them out of my house. I want them to go to college and grad school. I want them to pay their own bills, and I want them out of my house as much as I adore them. So failure to launch and not be working by age 25 is a concerning side, and the rate of 45%, that is a high number. So The biggest studies out of New Zealand and Australia are looking at adolescent start of marijuana, shows an 8-point drop in IQ by the age of 35. And the problem with every piece of data we have on marijuana is that it's based on the old marijuana. So marijuana in the 70s and the 80s and well into the 90s was 1% to 2.5% THC, which is again one of the psychoactive components, cannabinoids in marijuana. These days, there is not a single field-grown marijuana plant that is less than 9% THC. Most of it is ranging between 9 and 16% THC. I live in a part of the world that grows a lot of marijuana. I live in the fertile Connecticut River Valley. And every DEA confiscated plant in this country is sitting in that range of THC. So if you think your IQ is getting better as your THC level goes up in the product you're using, I'm going to argue with you for a long time. This is the other problem, is this is marijuana. So for those people in this room, the older adults who use marijuana, none of this should look very familiar to you. These are the concentrates of marijuana, and this represents about 40% of the Colorado market. This stuff is ranging between 45 and 95% THC. And that's what most of our kids are using. Then there are 1,000 ways to get it into your body, because you can smoke it, which I think many people are familiar with, but you can vaporize it in a heating element, which makes the hit even more intense. You can eat it in ice cream and candy bars and lollipops. You can drink it in a beer and milk or spaghetti sauce. You can rub it on your skin. You can spread it on your toast. You can't come up with a way you can't use marijuana these days. 60% of the market in Colorado is edibles, and specifically candy. So these pictures behind me, these are from Colorado stores. Those candy bars have 12 servings in them, and they range between 40 and 90% THC. This is a market intended to hook our teenagers and our young people, because old people with HIV disease and cancer and they can't stop throwing up, I guarantee you they are not eating gummy bears, right? That's not the way that medical marijuana for people who are sick, that's not the way they get it. So this is a market intended to hook as many kids as possible. And what did we pass in November on the ballot? We passed the most liberal marijuana bill imaginable. We said there's no limit to THC level. Sell whatever you want. We have no limit on the edibles. You can put marijuana in anything you want, in any form, and sell it, right? You have to be 21 to enter the store. I know that's what the law says. But let me be clear. I have a medical marijuana store not far from me. Those medical marijuana products, even though you have to be 21 with a medical marijuana certificate to walk in there, those products are all throughout our high school, right? Because what do 21-year-olds do, or 24-year-olds, right? They give it to 14 and 17-year-olds. So my point is that this age of 21 to buy this stuff, that's not going to be much of a blockade. So there's a great article, it's a New England Journal article from 2014 that asks the question, what are we thinking about marijuana? It actually doesn't say anything bad about marijuana. It says, didn't we learn this lesson already? In the year 1900, there was no cigarettes, right? There was native field-grown tobacco that has been a plant in North America for millennia, right? The native people of North America used tobacco plants very infrequently. They used it ritually. I'm sure they wrapped things in it. There was not the equivalent of a Native American smoking a pack a day of cigarettes, right? But in the year 1900, the industry took over. And what did the industry do first? They began to grow tobacco that was more intense. They grew leaves of tobacco with thicker veins, and it's in the veins where the nicotine is kept. That was the first thing. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then the next thing they did is they intensified how the product got delivered into your body. And they wrapped it up into a little piece of white paper and put in another 350 chemicals to make sure that you got as addicted as possible. And in the year 1900, less than 1% of Americans ever used tobacco. And by the year 1950, nearly 70% of American men smoked at least a pack a day. We just handed Big Tobacco their newest and greatest industry. And I think in another 20 years, we're going to reflect upon what the heck we were thinking in the year 2016 and beyond, where we decided to legalize marijuana and hand the entire industry this giant gift of having no limits to concentration and sell it in any form you want. We could have made very different decisions about what kind of marijuana we wanted to have sold. Okay, so Cigarettes have never been lower. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. What has gone up? E-cigarettes have gone up. I don't know what Woburn's e-cigarette vaping is like, but most schools find vape pens. And what's in those vape pens? Anything. Who said that? Awesome. The principal knew the answer. We have no idea what is in those vape pens, right? So kids will say to me, I'm just vaping the cotton candy flavor because I like the way it tastes, right? Like, I'll be clear, truckers are not vaping cotton candy flavor. That is marketed to our teenagers. But the truth is, those products are made in China and India, and they continue to be an unregulated industry. So we have no idea what's in them, honestly. I mean, would you feed your dog routinely food from China? I mean, honestly, you wouldn't. Yet our kids are inhaling some cartridge with formaldehyde and flavoring and likely nicotine, right? So we created a new generation of people now addicted to nicotine. And now you can vape anything in a pen. So they're likely vaping marijuana or cannabinoid oil in the bathroom at my high school and in Woburn High School at 11 o'clock study hall. That's not good for learning. I'm going to skip that slide. So let's talk about alcohol. 1/3 of us in this country drink absolutely nothing. 1/3 of us drink very, very lightly. A couple drinks a month, a drink a week. Not very much. Very light social drinkers. And the final 1/3 of Americans drink all the rest of the alcohol. And the final 10% of us drink on average between 9 and 10 drinks every single day. And most people hear that and they're like, that's not possible, right? That's a lot of alcohol, because that is a lot of alcohol. But it doesn't take much to get to 9 to 10 drinks a day, and I want to explore this with you. So a 12-ounce beer is a 12-ounce beer, and I think most people won't dispute that's considered a drink. I mean, obviously you can get higher alcohol, hoppy beers out there these days. Hard alcohol, spirits is 1.5 ounces. So if you're making your own gin and tonic at home, unless you're a real bartender, most of you are not measuring your drinks. You're like glug, 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 and then glug, 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 and hopefully the ratio is roughly right. But most of the time you actually have 2 drinks going in, realistically. And the real problem is wine. A drink of wine is 5 ounces. And when I talk to people in my office, I say, tell me about your relationship with alcohol. And women often say to me, I have a couple glasses at night. And I say, oh, what are you drinking? And they say, I drink wine. And I say, what goes in your glass? Because I know what glasses look like these days in most of our houses. They're not your mom's or your grandmother's 1960s wedding wine glasses. They are giant goblets, right? They're like mason jars on a stem. And women come home, and I'm one of these women, and I'm looking at all my women here too, right? And who has been up since 5:30 and let the dog out and switched out the laundry and cleaned up the breakfast dishes and got dressed to go to work an 8 or 12-hour day, and then comes home to find the house a mess and nobody actually walked the dog, and you're still dealing with the breakfast dishes and you're making dinner, you've got more laundry and cleaning, and then you have the rest of your job, right? Like, your lives as women are really hard for those of us that manage the house and also work. It has become a very normal phenomenon for women and men to walk in the house after a terrible day at work and to drink. And one of the things I want to say to all of you as adults and as parents is you have to think about the message that is being sent to your kid. When you have had a terrible day at work, and the first thing you do is you go to the fridge and you pop off the bottle on a beer bottle, or you unplug the cork on a bottle of wine, and the first thing you do is talk about your terrible day and you start drinking. The message you're sending to your kids is, wow, I am stressed out, and what makes me better is alcohol. And if all of us walked in our houses and said, man, I have had such a long day at work, who wants to go on a walk with me? I hate my job and I'd love to quit, and I can't do that quite yet, but I'm going to go stand in tree pose in the living room for the next 4 minutes, and I'm going to listen to John Kabat-Zinn on my smartphone and do a 10-minute meditation, because the truth is, all 3 of those things would make me a lot better than a giant goblet of wine will. I want you to ask yourself as an adult the last time you were at a party with other adults where alcohol was not involved. It almost always is involved. And I'm not saying I don't drink. I mean, I'm so not perfect. I already told you about my Pringles and my Diet Coke. But my point is that we all as adults often self-medicate with alcohol, and you've got to think about the message you're sending to your kids. We have never seen a demographic shift in alcoholism like we have in the last 15 years. Alcoholism is a man's disease, right? I trained at the Boston City Hospital. I specialized in alcohol abuse. 9-to-1 ratio alcoholism between men and women. In the last 15 years, it has shifted to 6-to-3 men to women. And that's because of this stuff. It's targeted towards women. It's being marketed this way. Okay, I said there were 3 things that were precursors to who might develop an addiction, and 1 was genetics, and 2 was early exposure while the brain is developing, and the 3rd one is a history of childhood neglect or trauma. I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but I am going to say a couple things about it. So a really good study came out in 2007 that looked at something called adverse childhood experience. It's called the ACE study. And as I'm talking, if you think, wow, this is really interesting, I'm a therapist, or I'm a guidance counselor, or I'm a school principal, I should know more about the ACE study. If you Google it, 1,000 things will pop up. But it's a study that asked about 10 questions that might have happened to you as a child under the age of 18. I'm not going to read it all. I'm going to read a handful of the questions. Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or ever act in a way that made you afraid that you might be hurt? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you, or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, support each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take you to the doctor if needed? Were your parents separated or divorced? Was there somebody in your household with a substance use disorder? Was there somebody in your household with major mental illness? Was there somebody in your household who was incarcerated? 10 questions, yes or no. If you score a 6 or a higher on the ACE study, and it's shocking how many of our Americans score a 6 or a higher on the ACE study, you're going to die 20 years earlier. If you score a 3 or a higher, you're much more likely to have a heart attack, emphysema, 30 or more broken bones. The story goes on and on. Every chronic disease out there, with the exception of diabetes and strokes, can be predicted by a household that showed significant neglect, abuse, or household dysfunction. This has a very specific look at our classrooms. Kids who have highly traumatized households, highly neglectful households, often are very impulsive, very distracted, a lot of outbursts. Their rates of graduation are incredibly low, 2.5 times suspension rates. Those kids look like they have ADD. They don't have ADD, they have trauma. Yet they get diagnosed with ADD and are medicated for it. Our society does not recognize trauma fully, and it doesn't know how to treat it. And we all, as a community of parents and caregivers and teachers and staff members, need to be able to acknowledge trauma and be able to get kids the treatment that they need. Because the diseases that are predicted most highly by having a high ACE score are 2, and that is addiction, and the second one is living with chronic pain. And it makes sense. You know, you grow up in a house and you're scared. You're scared for your siblings, you're scared for yourself, you're scared for your mom, you're hungry, you're wearing dirty clothes, you don't know when your next meals come from. You're living in a state of high alert, high panic, and a lot of us, to numb up that psychological fear and sadness and loneliness, will drink or drug to get through it. So it's a very high association between having a high ACE score and having an addiction. So 3 things are predetermining factors: genetic risk, having a history of childhood trauma, and having early exposure. You do not need all 3, you can have 1. The message to you guys is to talk to your kids. And the message to your kids is you need to delay your use as long as possible. I expect you're going to drink someday. You may even use marijuana. I don't want my kids to ever use heroin or smoke tobacco, because I hate tobacco so much. But otherwise, my message to them is delay your use. Let's talk about what it's like to go to college and show up at your first frat party, and how it is that you could be there as a non-drinker. When I sent my kid to college, you know what? I know my kid must drink a little bit in college. He's pretty responsible, though. I trained him, or he trained himself, or went to classes in CPR and American Red Cross, just basic certification. He also has Narcan that he carries on him because that's how he rolls. And his first day at college, I never call the guy, and he almost never calls me, but I must have called him that first week. I'm like, how's it going? He said, well, my first hour or 3 hours at college, I was at a party, and the kids were so drunk, right, that my first night at college, I spent in the ER. I spent the entire night in the ER with a kid whose name I didn't even know, but he was blacked out drunk. I was scared for him. I didn't know even where the infirmary was, so I called an Uber, and I brought him to the hospital. He spent 5 nights his first year of college with other kids in the emergency room. Mostly he called 911, which was probably the better response than Uber. But the point is that we all have kids who you can say, look, you know what the most critical thing you can do at a college frat party is to prevent somebody from getting sexually assaulted. Like, look around the room, look who's drinking too much, look who's vulnerable to that person drinking too much, and make sure both of them are safe. Because most of us who are assaulted, or most of us who are doing the assaulting, are under the influence of something. And there's nothing that will set your life more off course than being assaulted or doing the assaulting, right? So sending your kid to be the little knights in shining armor at most parties is an awesome thing to do. And because that's actually the norm for our kids, most of our kids would be happy to rally for that. That little group over there, they could go to their first frat party and prevent some girl from getting hauled up the back staircase, right? That would be an extraordinary thing for them to do. And they all have that capacity. So again, our kids are making the best decisions when it comes to alcohol and drug use than anybody in generations. So when you look at the data that just goes back to the mid-1990s, alcohol use has never been lower. 4.6% of our high school seniors are smoking cigarettes. Illicit drugs are flat, and they're flat because of marijuana. The marijuana use is still pretty high. But again, alcohol use, they're making awesome decisions. Let me just say to the parents. Again, I'm a high school student in the 1980s, and I know how we accessed alcohol. So first of all, we stole it from our parents' liquor cabinets. Anybody else do that? Okay. We drove to New Hampshire, which, by the way, is really close by, because the legal age in New Hampshire was 18, wasn't it? Right? That we used to get it from New Hampshire. It was appalling. And also, people didn't used to card you. You'd go to a liquor store, and it was kind of easy back in the day. It's really hard to get alcohol now. And where do kids get it? They get it from your house. So if you have alcohol at your house, where is it? Lock it up. That's my attitude. My alcohol is under lock and key at my house, not because I'm a crazy parent, because why would I make it easier for my teenagers to drink while their brain is developing than it needs to be? Cigarette use. So, one of the reasons I do this work, because I have a lot of jobs. I'm really busy, and I'm a mom, and I was saying to Mike Higgins that I'm such a chaotic mom that I was driving here. I was trying to find a grocery store that I thought I would be open on the way home because I have no food at my house, and my girls are texting me like, here's the grocery list. You got to find an open store on your way home because we need food. But I started doing this work because I moved out to Western Mass, which is where I grew up, and I asked, who's helping people with addiction? And they're like, nobody. And I thought, wow, that's not so good. We need to do some work because there are a lot of people here struggling with an opiate use problem. And every morning I get up and I walk the dog and I read the newspaper, and I start my newspaper on the back page with the obituaries, because I'm not morbid and I don't have low dopamine, but because I'm a family doctor who takes care of really old people who are going to die. So I need to know who died last night. I need to call their families. I need to fill out a death certificate. And I like to read people's stories. So in December of 2012, I read the obituary of that young woman in the red city year jacket that you see in the top corner. And it said, Ashley Sims, age 21, died of a heroin overdose at home. And I thought, oh my God, Ashley, I know her family, and I called her grandmothers who had raised her, and I said, I cannot believe Ashley died. And I'm so grateful you told the world how she died. Because for years I'd been reading obituaries of young people dying unexpectedly at home, and I knew why they died, but the only reason to die unexpectedly at home as a young person is an overdose or a suicide. Unless the obituary reads at the end, please contribute to Dana-Farber or the Lymphoma Leukemia Society, this is a generation of people we're losing to addiction. So our little local newspaper, thanks to these two grandmothers, began to run the story all the time on the front page about what addiction was doing to our community, what it's doing to our schools and to our jails and to our courthouse, our birthplace, to everything. And the Greenfield Recorder, which Greenfield's the county seat of the tiniest, most rural, and the poorest county in Massachusetts, Franklin County, really has led the way in terms of how to manage addiction in your community and have courts and jails and other places that actually respond to this as a disease and not as a social ill. I have no doubt in my mind that pills are on the hook for this addiction. The overprescribing of opiate prescriptions starting in the mid-1990s all the way through to basically today definitely hooked a huge number, tens of millions of individuals onto opiates. Now, having said that, I absolutely believe that chronic pain exists and that people can be on chronic opiates and not be addicted. Most people are not addicted, but the people that are addicted need help, and we needed not to have hooked them in the first place. I'm going to skip that slide. This is a slide that just shows what everybody knows. The more you prescribe, the more people died, the more people entered treatment for their addiction. This is a complicated slide, but it's one of my favorites because it's a real public health slide, and it shows you how people died in this country. So in a 10-year period of time, between the years 2000 and 2010, what was killing us as Americans? The bottom negative numbers are where we reduced death rates. We had a reduction in death rates of aortic aneurysms by 34%. Does anybody know why? Probably why. No, for those, are you in medical field? No. People in the medical field, people like me always want it to be something that we did. It's almost never anything we do, actually. Smoking, we reduce smoking rates. And when you get people off cigarettes, their aneurysm won't rupture. So it's a public health intervention. Fewer of us smoke cigarettes. That's awesome. We have a 23% reduction in death by influenza and pneumonia. Why is that? Yes, thanks to nurses, we vaccinate everybody. Motor vehicle death, reduction by 22%. Why? Seatbelts, safer cars, exactly. So those negative numbers are where we reduce death. So we had some reduction in death in that 10-year period of time. And then you see this huge epidemic of how people died. They died of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, end-stage kidney failure. Do we have an epidemic of those things? Why are so many people dying of those diseases? Because you live forever, because you're older, because you get to be 95. I don't know, I mean, again, I appear to be obituary obsessed, but when I read the obituaries and I see that a 77-year-old died, I'm like, oh, a 77-year-old died, that's so young. I have 3 people, I have more than that. I think I have 5 people in my practice who are 104 years old. I've never had that before, ever. But people live a really long time, and eventually I'm the one filling out their death certificate. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't know, they were 104. What killed them? Dementia, Alzheimer's. They stopped eating. I don't know, because their bodies have gone on and on and on, and it's not clear what single disease took them out. So we do not have an epidemic of that. Now you look at that top bar, and that shows a 276% increase in death by opioids. And what's critical about that bar is that this is pre-heroin, right? This is up to 2010 before heroin really hit us. And that bar graph would go right off that screen and right out that wall and right out that exit sign right now, because we have had such an increase in people dying of opiate overdose. So when you look at it in context of the public health diseases that kill us, I like sort of demonstrating how bad it has become. So you look at the country, those red areas are areas where people died of overdoses. In the year 1999 is that top map, and what you see lighting up is the very beginning deep part of Appalachia, and you see very beginning northern parts of New Mexico. And then 4 or 5 years go by and you start to see the country turn more red, and Florida lights up and New England turns orange. And then another 4 or 5 years go by and you look at how much of the country is red. Again, this is pre-heroin. I'm not going to say pre-heroin. Heroin's been around for a long time, but really cheap, really high-grade heroin, that's what changed. So most of the opiates that came to New England and came to Woburn and Northfield, where I live, came up I-95. We used to call it Oxy Highway, and it came from Florida, because most prescribers in Massachusetts weren't terrible prescribers. Massachusetts was like number 42 in the country in terms of opiate prescribing. We've never been a massively over-prescribing state. But Florida, on the other hand, had 600 pain clinics run by doctors who were cash business only. You would sometimes have strip malls with 2 different pain clinics in them, and they would run these charter buses where you could have a free trip to Florida, all expenses paid, free hotel, all your meals, and all you needed to do was walk into 2 pain clinics a day and hand your bag of drugs and prescriptions over to the tour operator. And then the tour operator would get back on that bus with, you know, I can't even give up the numbers, $500,000 worth of drugs, and then distribute them throughout Kentucky and West Virginia and Maine and Western Massachusetts. So in the year 2009 and 2010, the federal government said to Florida, you have got to shut this down because you're destroying the country. And if you don't shut down these pill mills, we're going to cut off all your federal money. You're not going to get any education money. You're not going to get any highway money. We're done with you. So the DEA and Florida officials swept in, and they closed down nearly every one of those pill mills. And there are 34 doctors who were American-trained licensed physicians who were not physicians, they were drug dealers. They were cash-only businesses making between $5 and $10 million a year. They are now in jail. I hope they stay in jail for a really long time. But the problem is when you shut down the pill mills, and yet you have people struggling with addiction all over the East Coast, what are you left with? Right? It's very predictable where we were headed in 2010. Heroin was already here. The Mexican cartels knew what we were doing. They had mowed over their marijuana fields and planted opium poppies starting like in 2006 and 2007. This was something. This is a very smart, high-tech market. It is not easy to turn off. Building a wall is not going to change the drug scene in this country. This is a Washington Post article that was very recent. Anybody read this article? It's within the last month. And it was talking about how the drugs get here, including how fentanyl gets here. It's unbelievably smart. There's a lot of obviously human smuggling, but it involves a lot of small airports, a lot of Uber, a lot of hopping around the country. It is a very smart, high-tech texting kind of thing. I mean, we could have 50 bags of whatever you want in the lobby in 4 minutes. It takes one text. So this thing is not going to turn off easily. So when you ask EMS what their #1 drug of concern is, those dark green areas, the answer is heroin. What always amazes me about this map is that the southeast does not light up as a problem. It was so close to Florida and I-95. Like, how did the southeast get away with not having a heroin problem? The problem here is those dark purple states, there's between 1 and 1.5 bottles of opiate per person in that state today, meaning that the overprescription of opiates in the southeast continues. There may not be giant pill mills, but they're still cash-based businesses, and the clinicians there are still prescribing way over the top. So while there are pills still on the streets, you don't need heroin to take over, right? It's when the pills get shut down that heroin takes over. So when you look at the country, those red states are heroin states. That's us. Orange is heroin now too. But if you can imagine those purple states becoming red states, if you think that the states of Alabama and Louisiana and Oklahoma are having parent forums like this at night and having Narcan in the schools and in every patrol car and building methadone clinics and training doctors in Suboxone provision, if you think that's happening in the southeast, I don't believe it's happening there, right? And when the pills get shut down in the southeast and the heroin moves in, there will be hundreds of thousands of deaths by heroin overdose in the southeast. It's not going to look pretty in the next 5 to 7 years. So how do our kids get exposed to opiates? In general, very few kids use opiates, even opiate pills. They just don't. First of all, if you have bottles of anything at home, Xanax, Ritalin, Klonopin, Percocet, Vicodin, any controlled substance in your house that you are not actively using, it belongs in the police take-back box yesterday. Like, the fact that I'm even still saying that message is killing me. Seriously, that's like a 2012 message. Done. Get it out of your house. If it's in your house and you're actively using it, under lock and key. There's never an excuse that kids get pills from your house, anybody's house. So again, police take back. We have that in Woburn, right? There's multiples. They're everywhere. There's no excuse is where I am right now on that one. Lock them up or get them out. So most of our kids get opiates because they get injured. So a femur fracture playing ice hockey or football, or you're a girl soccer player and you tear your ACL and you get that repaired, wisdom teeth. Kids don't have root canals, but wisdom teeth. Sometimes will have other oral surgeries. They get an appendectomy. So, who in this room either parented or recently had wisdom teeth removed? Really? Nobody? Back there? Anybody? Wisdom teeth? I guess I'm wondering what was recently prescribed to you as an opiate for a surgery, for a kid? Vicodin? Okay, and how much was given? 12, okay. So, yeah. Your son was given 40? What year was that? Did you say this year you were given a script for 40 Vicodin? Holy, a 19-year. Okay, so I'm going to say the words holy smokes, right? Like, that's a prescriber that I'm concerned about hasn't understood that we have a problem. So more often than not, and I've been doing these talks for a while, and it used to be the answer was 30, right? There used to be the answer was 60, right? And it went from 60 to 30, and now the answer is routinely 12 or less, sometimes 15, but way less. But when I ask the question, how many did they use? How many did that use with the 12? 2, right? 2. And without divulging too much, your guy who got 40, did he use 40? You didn't fill it. Lovely. A mom took charge, right? So when I've asked this question, I think I've asked this question to 20,000 people. How many did you use? The answer was 100% of the time, 0, 2, 4, or 6. One time, somebody from the back shouted out, I used all 60. And I was like, that was a bad surgery. And then he said, but I'm an addict. So most people should get 6 or less. Most people with oral surgery can control it with Tylenol and Motrin in combination, period. When my kid had oral surgery, Tylenol, Motrin, distraction, period. That's all I did for her. I didn't fill my prescription either, although they gave it to me. You always get to determine what you're going to fill, right? Part of Governor Baker's legislation from last summer said that you can walk into a pharmacy with any controlled substance, with anything, and say, I don't want 30, I want 4. The problem is the other 26 disappear. You don't get to go back tomorrow and get 4 more. You got to call to get your 4 more. But that's fine. If you know you're going to use 4 or 5 or 6, that's what you should take. So you can control it at the site of the prescriber and say, don't give that to me, I'm not interested, or give me 6. You get to say that, right? Who cares if you have to call them for another prescription? They're on call. Somebody is on call 24/7 in every practice out there, and people need to, again, do their jobs and suck it up and refill things if necessary. That's what I do. Okay, so I'm done on being that. Did I say bad words? I said bad words, I'm sorry. So I want to remind you that what you need to look for at your house is just signs of concern. So signs of concern with your kid is your kid's not thriving anymore, right? They look like they were rode hard and put up wet. They're starting to struggle in school. They're hanging out with a crowd that you don't think is going well for them. They're not hanging out with anybody. They're stopping their activities. They're not doing sports. Kids who start to struggle with an addiction start to fail, like not just grade fail, but they start to fall apart. Things do not go well when you're struggling with addiction. You cannot keep it together. And I always say that I want to be the parent who figured out my kid was struggling about 3 months in. That's my own little bar I have held for myself. I want to figure it out 3 months in. I kind of don't want to be the parent who figured it out 3 years in. And maybe I will be the parent who figures it out 3 years, but I hope not. So I look in my kids' rooms and I look through their stuff and I don't try to violate their privacy, but they're living under my roof and I pay for everything. And I don't clean their rooms, I do not do their laundry, I walk in their rooms and I'm largely disgusted, but I look for everything up on the screen. And I stole this from Learn to Cope, which is a support organization, and the closest one of Learn to Cope is where? What'd you say? Okay, so Tewksbury and where? In Cambridge, okay. So Learn to Cope is an amazing parent-started support organization for families who struggle with addiction. Specifically, they tend to work on opiates, but could be any addiction. So these are the things I look for in my kids' room. First of all, I shouldn't find any pills in my kids' room. Tylenol, Motrin, Benadryl, what? They don't belong in my kids' rooms. My kids do not know how to dose Tylenol. A 15-year-old with period cramps will keep taking Tylenol. That is not okay. High amounts of Tylenol cause liver failure. So what I say to my kids is, look, you have a headache, you have period cramps, you're hurting, talk to an adult, right? They live in a house where there are 2 doctors, right? They don't talk to me because I'm a doctor, I'm a mom. Come tell me what's happening, and if you need something, I'll give you some advice about what you might want to try. Which isn't always a pill, right? You're hurting, your body hurts, let's go do some stretching, I'll roll you out. You didn't do your PT exercises, do them, right? Anything you could snort through. So I do not like straws in my kids' room because they freak me out. Rolled up dollar bills, the inside of pens, any drug paraphernalia like the caps to an insulin needle or any syringes. Unless your kid's a type 1 diabetic, of course there's no syringes in your house. Burnt foil, anything you're cooking drugs down. And why would you ever have burnt foil in your house? Ever. I mean, baked potato roast in your backyard, that's it. That's your one day every 3 years. Otherwise, burnt foil is more than a red flag. Bent spoons, cooking on a spoon, burnt marks on your spoons, never. If you found those in your kid's room, boy, that horse is way out of the barn, and you need to be high alert, and you need to help your kid. You need to be immediately present for your kid and say, I love you, I'm terrified, what can I do to help you? Baggies. People find thousands, hundreds, high hundreds of little plastic bags or wax bags with residue in them. They're everywhere. And they're not in plain sight. That's the point, is that eventually it starts to hang out in plain sight because kids get sloppy. But it's hidden around, in the bed, under the mattress, in the sock drawer. If you have somebody in your life who you love that you're worried about with an addiction, you need Narcan, also called naloxone. You can get it at any pharmacy, Walgreens, most CVS's in the state of Massachusetts without a prescription. You can just walk in and say, I need Narcan, please. If there's a website called Get Naloxone Now, and it tells you how to administer it, how to recognize somebody's overdosing. Every patrol car, from what I could tell in Massachusetts, carries Narcan now. But 2 or 3 years ago, right, Mike, that wasn't true. I think it was like you guys who started it. It was like Quincy and Woburn and Bill Ricca who started this entire thing. And now it's everywhere. Your school has Narcan, right? But let me be clear, 2 years ago, I think no school in Massachusetts had Narcan. And it was the school nurses. We showed up at one talk and I was like, you guys need Narcan. Everybody needs Narcan. And then before you knew it, school nurses were like, done, we got Narcan in our schools. It's not likely a kid is going to overdose, but a staff member could, a custodian could. And what are you going to do? You have minutes to respond, and the only thing that's going to get somebody out of an overdose is naloxone, Narcan, period. So I'm grateful that Woburn has it and that nobody fought back, because that would be a ridiculous thing to fight over. So these are awesome books on the notion of addiction. Again, my slides are available from Rick, poor Rick, but if anybody wants them. But if you want to read more about addiction, or you thought this was kind of interesting, I should learn more, every one of these books is really great on addiction. That top middle book called The Body Keeps the Score is a book on trauma and what trauma does to the body and the brain over a lifetime. And if you're an educator or a guidance counselor or a therapist or you're in the medical field, I tell you, that book changed me in the way I practice more than anything else. So that is a beautiful book written by a Boston psychiatrist, Bessel van der Kolk. All of these books are awesome, and I recommend them. There's a good YouTube video. I don't know if it's good. There's a YouTube video of me giving this talk. I change my talks like every 3 weeks. I add in new slides. I add in new data. For people who've seen my talks, I have a lot of the same stuff because the disease hasn't really magically changed that much. But if you want to share this with anybody, there's a bunch of YouTubes of me standing at a microphone, but this is me sitting in a pink shirt. It's a little more professional. The graphics are better, so you're welcome to share that with people. But again, any one of these books would be great reads. What questions can I answer for people? I'm taking Mike in the way back. So I think ADD is a real disease, but you need to figure out who really has it. So we think statistically that about 5% of kids have ADD. In many school districts, I could tell you the percent who have stimulants prescribed to them is way higher than 5%. So having a true diagnosis made by somebody who knows what they're talking about is absolutely critical. And as a parent and as a doctor, I could say both those things. If my kid had ADD, man, I'd really want to make sure that was diagnosed correctly and then the medicines were appropriately prescribed. Now, having said that, kids who have ADD, who are prescribed medicine, do much better on this planet. They do better in school because our schools are really regimented. You have to sit in a chair and be quiet until your hand goes up. These are not easy places for kids whose minds are racing to be. And those kids feel stupid and out of place, and they're not smart, and they're failing. And the truth is they are smart. They just can't stop that brain from working, and that impulse control gets them in a hot mess, not just with their teachers, but with their friends. It's really bad for the mental health of kids with ADD to get not treated. That's one of my opinions, right? Because you could set up a kid who's really demoralized. When you look at the statistics of people with addiction, 30% of people with addiction have ADD. Now, which came first? Did we give them stimulants and create addicts? Most of us don't think so. It's that impulse control, which is part of the definition of ADD, that really strong lack of impulse control and thinking, yeah, that's a good idea, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a really strong overlay with people who struggle with addiction. So what I find is when I'm taking care of a person with addiction and they have a childhood diagnosis of ADD, they do better when they're back on their stimulants. So it's a complicated answer to the question, Mike. There are people out there who think there's some correlation between them. I think that giving stimulants to people who do not need stimulants is always a bad idea. There are school districts out there, maybe not Woburn, but I could tell you those western W suburbs that are really wealthy, Cohasset. I don't know what the ADD stimulant prescribing is like in those towns. I can tell you it's really high because they can be performance-enhancing drugs. Private schools, they overprescribe like crazy. Maybe 20% of kids in private school are on stimulants. That's insane. Those are people trying to get their kids into Yale. Are there questions over here? Yeah. So the question was, how old would I put a kid on an ADD medicine? I mean, I think by the time you're in school and you need to start performing in school, and your self-esteem is starting to crash because you're not able to participate in class. You know what? Your classmates hate you when you're out of control in class, right? That's not good. So, but that's not a kindergartner, right? Kindergartners should be racing around the room from what I can tell. It's probably not even a first grader, but I can't answer for everybody. I think too young, there's no real benefit, and maybe there's some harm there. But once your kid has to be sitting in a room and learning and engaged, 7, 8, 9, if they're really struggling, I really think stimulants really help those kids. But again, 5% or less of us have it. And really, in this country, lots more than that are prescribed it. Oh my God, I can't handle any more stimulant questions. That's not what I expected. Any other questions over here? Yeah. What kind of treatment plan do I think would be successful for somebody with an opiate addiction? Is that what you asked? Yeah. Well, so let me be clear. I don't think detox is a treatment plan at all, right? So I can't say that clearly enough. That what works to help anybody with an addiction is length of time away from the drug. You need time away from the drug to let your brain get better. So 5 to 7 to 8 days in a detox is useless, right? All it does is yank the drug out of your brain so you get a clean slate to start all over again on Monday. And if anything, we put people at greater risk. So what works? Time works. Do we give people time? Absolutely not, right? We don't pay for time. You can't take time off work. I saw a kid today, he's like, I can't stay any longer than 5 days because they'll fire me. And I'm like, this is a medical problem. If you had cancer, your job wouldn't fire you. And he was like, I'm going to get fired. So I just thought, this kid is going to go out and use in 6 days, right? So we need to build a system that isn't just the medical management of the disease. I refuse to use the word detox because I work really hard not to detox my people. I work really hard to get them stable in some sort of treatment of any sort and have it not be too painful while they're doing it, and then get them into a 30, a 90, and then beyond program. The problem is, give me a beyond program, right? There are very few 90-day treatments out there, and to look for good quality sober living for people, it is so hard. There are very few spots. So the people in the state who are like, awesome, Massachusetts and Vermont, we're #1 and #2 in terms of managing addiction in the country. I'm like, wow, the rest of the country must be a hot mess, right? Because we're not doing that great. Our death by opiates in 2016 were much higher than 2015. And this first beginning quarter of 2017 is looking even worse than last year. We don't got this, my friends. We're not on top of it yet. And this sort of, I don't know the last time you heard any of our elected officials really deeply talking about opiates and what they're doing. I'm not hearing it anymore. There's a lot of, we're controlling the pills now. We have a new thing where you can check, right? It's all good. I'm like, it's not all good. I got fentanyl everywhere. People are dying left and right. I now run a drug detox place. People are so much sicker walking in because they are using 150 bags of fentanyl every day, right? Those people are not going to respond to normal treatments. And I don't hear any money, anything about structured sober living. So in my fantasy world, what would I do? I would set up sober living communities, particularly in rural areas where everybody from, Tewksbury and Methuen can come live out in my rural area of the world, where it's a little less hard to be on the highway, quite honestly. And it would be tightly regulated, not in like a military camp. This would be a loving, warm, supportive place where there would be mindfulness-based meditation and regular yoga and tons of exercise, and you would be growing food for the Western Mass Food Bank and raising chickens and giving back to society. Because what builds dopamine in your brain? Having positive relationships with other human beings, falling in love, restoring relationships with your family, giving back to society and community, getting trained to go back to school and have a job, raising animals, like all these homeless pets, my jail guys walk dogs all day, right? That's part of their therapy. So you could design something, but it's not going to be free. And at some point, the cost of what it takes to spend on people actively struggling with addiction far exceeds the cost of helping them stay sober. And we just have to do the math on it and say we've got to spend the money for this, right? So that's what it takes, is time and recovery. That's what makes you better. But it's a long time, 1.5 or 2 years before I start to feel less stressed about you. You could still relapse, we can all relapse, right? But the relapse rate goes down. There's a line that somebody taught me just last night, which was alive till 25, because the 20-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, the 24-year-olds, when you hit 24, there's a magic little thing that happens because the brain is now developed fully, and that impulse control, the brakes actually turn on. It's much easier to help somebody at 24 than it is when they're 20 or 22. But how do you keep them alive till then? That's the thing. Yeah. I'm sure it's true. I mean, like, make anything you want. I believe it. I'll say, when I hear that somebody made something new, I'm like, sure, it sounds like they made it, because everybody's a chemist and you can make it any way you want. Fentanyl, you can buy it on the market, you can buy it on the internet, on the black market. It is not the fentanyl that is prescribed by me or an oncologist for cancer pain, right? It's not the Duragesic patch that we're scraping off and putting in a lollipop. Fentanyl is now manufactured in China, probably some in India and a lot in Mexico now, and it gets shipped in here. And you can order it in the dark black market on the internet and have it FedEx to you this week. So its availability is extraordinary. And yeah, I'm sure you could cook it into anything, and everybody knows it's 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin, which is why we're having all these rates of increased death. It's really scary. And then the carfentanil is sometimes considered to be 1,000 times fentanyl, right? So it's really frightening for people in the law enforcement world who pick up this stuff, right? Snowflake size can kill you. So this is one of, for those of us that do Amazon shopping at home, everything can be delivered to your house. But that's the problem. Everything can be delivered to your house. Anybody else with any questions? My vision isn't great in this room. Did you have a question next? Yeah. So I think you're asking, do people get better? In terms of dopamine, they do. And in that little list I just gave you of what it takes to get better, it's time, distance from the drug, but then doing stuff, doing things that builds dopamine in the brain. And you guys can tell me what builds dopamine. Literally, falling in love, it's the best dopamine builder there is. But falling back in love with your kids, restoring relationships with people who you've really ticked off in the last 5 years, in having a purpose on this planet. Going to jail at 19 and having a Corey and not being able to get a job, that will help somebody not get better, my friends, right? Getting locked up in a jail cell for 5 years, dopamine does not get rebuilt in jail. Jails are places where dopamine, if anything, gets worse because really scary, bad things happen in our jails. So locking people up for addiction, I'm not a big fan of that. Unless you're running an amazing jail that does treatment the entire time you're there, they're not going to get better. But do people get better with addiction? Absolutely they do. They do. But it isn't easy. And again, that woman I told today, I thought to myself, boy, your cancer is going to be easier to treat than your alcoholism because addiction is such a hard disease to treat. Okay, I got people in that back corner who I can't see in front of Mike. Yeah. 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 So, I don't think we have enough data on marijuana to know for sure, but yeah, at any point you stop while your brain is still developing, I think that's a good thing, because it gives your brain time to do what it was supposed to have been doing the right way, not the wrong way. So if you are a 15-year-old who's using a lot of marijuana, and you heard some of this talk, and you thought, wow, I'd like to have a really great brain when I'm 27, I'm going to stop now, that kid is going to have an awesome chance of having a full, lovely, perfect life. If you used marijuana from 15 to 23 and then stopped, you've probably done some damage, quite honestly. You have a setback happening. Now, do people get better? They do. But I don't think you're going to have the IQ you might have had at 35. And it's not just about IQ. Don't get me wrong on that. So I think the earlier you can stop an addiction in its tracks while the brain is developing, the better. I was going to say something else on this front, though. I can't remember what I was going to say to you. But so, and that when you look at an adult who starts using marijuana in an adult brain, you don't see the same impact. You don't see a drop in IQ, because they've done these comparisons. They've looked at adolescent start and post-26 start. You don't see the drop in IQ. You don't see the level of addiction. So somebody in that back corner in our beginning of what's wrong with marijuana said it's not addictive. And it's true that the old marijuana at 2% THC or less is fairly low addiction. 9% of people get addicted to it. That's pretty low. But today's marijuana is sitting at 30 to 40% addiction rates. And that is especially true in the teenage brain. But once you're older, the likelihood of getting truly addicted to marijuana, once your brain is fully developed, goes down to about 10%. So again, you've got to catch the addiction early and get treatment early for it. Maybe one more question? Yeah. So this is a good question. There's a very strong connection, especially with these more potent THC marijuanas, with psychosis, an earlier onset of psychosis. And for those people, does anybody work in the ER? Here? No. For those people who work in an ER setting or in a psych facility, I tell you, I see a psychotic person, the first thing I say is, how much weed did you smoke? What was your source? Where did it come from? Because a lot of psychosis these days is marijuana induced. Now, what we're not seeing is that we're not seeing a doubling of the rates of schizophrenia in Colorado. Now, Colorado's marijuana has been legal since 2012, so that's not very long. It's 4 years. 1% of us in this country have schizophrenia. That's a pretty high number. It's a scary number, because schizophrenia, for those of us who have family members, is a hard disease to manage. Definitely an earlier onset of psychosis. Psychosis is often the first step towards schizophrenia. So we worry about it a lot. It is a big concern to us. I would say the jury is still out as to whether we're going to get to 1.5% schizophrenia in this country. That would be a massive public health disaster. I know that seems small, but to go from 1% to 1.5% of people with schizophrenia, which is a major mental health disorder that involves a huge amount of societal resources, most of those people end up in jail, right, or in psych facilities. So going up even by 0.5% would be terrifying to me. I'm glad you brought that one up. So my answer is the jury is out. Psychosis, incredibly common, happening earlier and earlier. The Colorado ERs, I don't know who's been to Colorado in the last few years. Anybody? You've been there? Have you? What did it look like when you were in Colorado? Did you see anything interesting? No. Were you looking? Okay. Colorado? No? You were in Colorado? You could smell pot a lot. There's a lot of public consumption of marijuana. There are places in Denver and Boulder, so I wonder if you were in the big cities. Okay. So Denver and Boulder, they're often on a block, 2 different stores on a block. And in Boulder, but I used to, Boulder's an awesome, fun, hippie city. Now it's just like a pot city. Like, honestly, I actually wouldn't bring my kids to Boulder anymore, because people are just walking around. You're not supposed to consume it in public, right? But the ERs are filled with people who are unbelievably high and are too high to do anything. It didn't kill them. I don't disagree. Pot doesn't kill you. There were 2 deaths in Colorado, both of whom were psychotic. One guy jumped out of a building to his death, and another guy shot his wife. But they were psychotic because high potency marijuana, again, a Kit Kat bar with 12 servings, nobody in this room is sharing their Kit Kat bar with 11 people. I know that, right? And instead, you're eating the entire Kit Kat bar and you got psychotic. So let me take another question, and then I'll let you guys go home. Yeah. Well, I think some people are moving there because they want marijuana, but some people want to move there because it's green and it has a low obesity rate and it's considered a healthy state, maybe. Also, the housing prices go up. Some of those houses are just filled with pot, right? I mean, they're grow houses where you can make, $500,000 that year if you convert the house. So yeah, Colorado has a booming real estate market. I don't disagree with that. I don't know if that's why I would move to Colorado. I'm not moving to Colorado. We got work to do in this state because I tell you, by mandate, every town can have a marijuana dispensary or 5, and the only way you can not have one is if your town says we don't want one and we're going to vote against it. Otherwise, there's going to be one coming near you. And based on that candy and 90% THC, I'm not interested, right? I need them to change the laws. I need our great legislative staff to make some limits. There needs to be a 15% limit on THC. Just write it now. I'd like you to be 25 years old to buy marijuana. I know that sounds like I'm some crazy extremist, but over 25, I really don't care what you do except to get on my roads and put my law enforcement people in harm's way. But I think you need to be older to buy this stuff. Your brain has to be fully developed. And I think there should not be the edible candies. I think it's wrong. So I think that would fix it. That, for me, I don't really care at that point. I still care a little bit. But that's what other states did. And instead, Massachusetts, the smartest state in the union, said, no, we're going to let you have everything you want. What were we thinking? We weren't thinking. Okay, you guys are awesome. Thanks for having me.